Hello everybody. I am so glad to be able to visit with you by video. I miss coming to read to you and I hope that you are all doing okay. We are going to pick up where we left off, chapter 4 from A Walk in the Woods by Bill Bryson. And if you recall, this is a story about Bill Bryson, who decided to take a hike along the Appalachian Trail and invited his friend Stephen Katz, who is not necessarily physically ready for this journey. So they have some beautiful times and some pretty hilarious experiences along this way. So I'm going to start in here with chapter 4. There is a strange frozen violence in a forest out of season. Every glade and dale seemed to have just completed some massive cataclysm. Downed trees lay across the path every 50 or 60 yards, often with great bomb craters of dirt around their splayed roots. Dozens more lay rotting on the slopes, and every third or fourth tree, it seemed, was leaning steeply on a neighbor. It was as if the trees couldn't wait to fall over, as if their sole purpose in the universal scheme of things was to grow big enough to topple with a really good splintering crash. I was forever coming up to trees so precariously and weightily tipped over the path that I would waver, then scoot under, fearing the crush of really unfortunate timing, and imagining Katz coming along a few minutes later, regarding my wiggling legs and saying, "Shoot, Bryson, what are you doing under there?" But no trees fell. Everywhere the woods were still and preternaturally quiet, except for the occasional gurgle of running water and the tiny shuffle of wind-stirred leaves along the forest floor. There was almost never a sound. The woods were silent because spring had not yet come. In a normal year, we would be walking into the zestful bounty of a southern mountain spring, through a radiant, productive, newborn world alive with the zip of insects and the fussy twitter of birds. A world bursting with fresh, wholesome air and that rich, velvety, lung-filling smell of chlorophyll you get when you push through low, leafy branches. Above all, there would be wildflowers in dazzling profusion, blossoming from every twig, pushing valiantly through the fertile litter on the forest floor, carpeting every sunny slope and stream bank. Trillium and trailing arbutus, Dutchman's breeches, Jack in the pulpit, mandrake, violets, snowy bluets, buttercups and bloodroot, dwarf iris, columbine, and wood sorrel, and other cheerful, nodding wonders almost beyond counting. There are 1,500 types of wildflower in the southern Appalachians, 40 rare types in the northern Georgia woods alone. They are a sight to lift the hardest heart. But they were not to be seen in the woods this grim March. We trudged through a cold, silent world of bare trees beneath pewter skies on ground like iron. We fell into a simple routine. Each morning we rose at first light, shivering and rubbing arms, made coffee, broke down camp, ate a couple of fistfuls of raisins, and set off into the silent woods. And if you don't remember, cats had gotten rid of most of their food, so all they have left is very minimal food. We would walk from about 7:30 till 4. We seldom walked together. Our paces didn't match. But every couple of hours, I would sit on a log, always surveying the surrounding undergrowth for the rustle of bear or boar, and wait for cats to catch up, to make sure everything was okay. Sometimes other hikers would come along and tell me where Katz was and how he was progressing, which was nearly always slowly but gamely. The trail was much harder for him than for me. And to his credit, he tried not to complain. It never escaped me for a moment that he didn't have to be there. I had thought we would have a jump on the crowds, but there was a fair scattering of other hikers. 3 students from Rutgers University in New Jersey, an astoundingly fit older couple with tiny packs hiking to their daughter's wedding in far-off Virginia, a gawky kid from Florida named Jonathan, perhaps 24 of us all together in the same general neck of the woods, all heading north. Because everyone walks at different rates and rests at different times, 3 or 4 times a day, you bump into some or all of your fellow hikers, especially on mountaintops with panoramic views or beside streams with good water, and above all, at the wooden shelters that stand at distant intervals, ostensibly, but not always actually, a day's hike apart, in clearings just off the trail. In consequence, you get to know your fellow hikers, at least a little, quite well if you meet them nightly at the shelters. You become part of an informal clump, a loose, sympathetic affiliation of people from different age groups and walks of life, but all experiencing the same weather, same discomforts, same landscapes, same eccentric impulse to hike to Maine. Remember, they started in Georgia, so they're hiking from from Georgia to Maine on the Appalachian Trail. Even at busy times, however, the woods are great providers of solitude, and I encountered long periods of perfect aloneness when I didn't see another soul for hours. Many times when I would wait for Katz for a long spell and no other hiker would come along. When that happened, I would leave my pack and go back and find him to see that he was all right, which always pleased him. Sometimes he would be proudly bearing my stick, which I had left by a tree when I had stopped to tie my laces or adjust my pack. We seemed to be looking out for each other. It was very nice. I can put it no other way. Around 4, we would find a spot to camp and pitch our tents. One of us would go off to fetch and filter water while the other prepared a sludge of steamy noodles. Sometimes we would talk, but mostly we existed in a kind of companionable silence. By 6 o'clock, dark and cold and weariness would drive us to our tents. Katz went to sleep instantly, as far as I could tell. I would read for an hour or so with my curiously inefficient little miner's lamp, its beam throwing quirky concentric circles of light onto the page, like the light of a bicycle lamp, until my shoulders and arms grew chilly out of the bag and heavy from tilting the book at awkward angles to catch the nervous light. So I would put myself in darkness and lie there listening to the peculiarly clear, articulated noises of the forest at night. The sighs and fidgets of wind and leaves, the weary groan of boughs, the endless murmurings and stirrings, like the noises of a convalescent ward after lights out. You might know what that sounds like. Until at last I fell heavily asleep. In the morning, we would rise, shivering and rubbing arms, wordlessly repeat our small chores, fill and hoist our packs, and venture into the great entangling forest again. On the 4th evening, we made a friend. We were sitting in a nice little clearing beside the trail, our tents pitched, eating our noodles, savoring the exquisite pleasure of just sitting, when a plumpish, bespectacled young woman in a red jacket and a customary outsized pack came along. She regarded us with a crinkled squint of someone who is either chronically confused or can't see very well. We exchanged hellos and the usual banalities about the weather and where we were. Then she squinted at the gathering gloom and announced that she would camp with us. Her name was Mary Ellen. She was from Florida, and she was, as cats forever termed her in a special tone of awe, a piece of work. She talked nonstop, except when she was clearing her eustachian tubes, which she did frequently, by pinching her nose and blowing out with a series of violent and alarming snorts of a sort that would make a dog leave the sofa and get under a table in the next room. I have long known that it is part of God's plan for me to spend a little time with each of the most stupid people on the earth, and Mary Ellen was proof that even in the Appalachian woods, I would not be spared. It became evident from the first moment that she was a rarity. "So what are you guys eating?" she said, plonking herself down on a spare log and lifting her head to peer into our bowls. "Noodles? Big mistake. Noodles have got like no energy. I mean like zero." She unblocked her ears. "Is that a starship tent?" I looked at my tent. "I don't know. Big mistake. They must have seen you coming at the camping store. What did you pay for it?" "I don't know." "Too much, that's how much. You should have got a 3-season tent." "It is a 3-season tent." "Pardon me saying so, but it is like seriously dumb to come out here in March without a 3-season tent." She unblocked her ears. "It is a 3-season tent. You're lucky you haven't frozen yet. You should go back and punch out the guy that sold it to you, because he's been negligible selling you that." "Believe me, it is a 3-season tent." She unblocked her ears and shook her head impatiently. "That's a 3-season tent." She indicated Katz's tent. "That's exactly the same tent." She glanced at it again. "Whatever. How many miles did you do today?" "About 10. Actually, we had done 8.4, but this had included several formidable escarpments, including a notable wall of hell called Preaching Rock, the highest eminence since Springer Mountain, for which we had awarded ourselves bonus miles for purpose of morale. 10 miles, is that all? You guys must be really out of shape. I did 14 too. "How many of your lips done?" said Katz, looking up from his noodles. She fixed him with one of her more severe squints. "Same as the rest of me, of course." She gave me a private look, as if to say, "Is your friend, seriously weird or something?" She cleared her ears. "I started at Gooch Gap." "So did we. That's only 8.4 miles. She shook her head sharply, as if shooing a particular tenacious fly. 14 too. "No, really, it's only 8.4. "Excuse me, but I just walked it. I think I ought to know." And then suddenly, "God, are those Timberland boots? Mega mistake. How much did you pay for them?" And so it went. Eventually, I went off to swill out the bowls and hang the food bag. When I came back, she was fixing her own dinner, but still talking away at Katz. "You know what your problem is?" she was saying. "Pardon my French, but you're too fat." Katz looked at her in quiet wonder. "Excuse me?" "You're too fat. You should have lost weight before you came out here. Should have done some training, 'cause you could have a serious, heart thing out here." "Heart thing?" When your heart stops and you, die. "Do you mean a heart attack?" "That's it." Mary Ellen, it should be noted, was not short on flesh herself, and unwisely at that moment she leaned over to get something from her pack, displaying an expanse of backside on which you could have projected motion pictures for, let us say, an army base. It was an interesting test of Katz's forbearance. He said nothing, but rose to go for a pee, and out of the side of his mouth as he passed me, he rendered a certain convenient expletive as 3 low dismayed syllables, like the call of a freight train in the night. The next day, as always, we rose chilled and feeling wretched and set about the business of attending to our small task, but this time with the additional strain of having our every move examined and rated, while we ate raisins and drank coffee with flecks of toilet paper in it. And if you remember back, not only did Katz throw out the food, he threw out the coffee filters. So they've had to use toilet paper squares for their coffee filter. Mary Ellen gorged on a multi-course breakfast of oatmeal Pop-Tarts, trail mix, and a dozen small squares of chocolate, which she lined up in a row on the log beside her. We watched like orphaned refugees while she plumped her jowls with food and enlightened us as to our shortcomings with regard to diet, equipment, and general manliness. And then, now a trio, we set off into the woods. Mary Ellen walked sometimes with me and sometimes with Katz, but always with one of us. It was apparent that for all her bluster, she was majestically inexperienced and untrailworthy. She hadn't the faintest idea of how to read a map, for one thing, and ill at ease on her own in the wilderness. I couldn't help feeling a little sorry for her. Besides, I began to find her strangely entertaining. She had the most extraordinarily redundant turn of phrase. She would say things like, "There's a stream of water over there," and "It's nearly 10 o'clock a.m. Once, in reference to winters in Central Florida, she solemnly informed me, "We usually get frost once or twice a winter, but this year we had 'em a couple of times." Katz, for his part, clearly dreaded her company and winced beneath her tireless urgings to smarten his pace. For once, the weather was kindly, more autumnal than spring-like, but gratifyingly mild. By 10 o'clock, the temperature was comfortably in the 60s. For the first time since Amicalola, I took off my jacket and realized with mild perplexity that I had absolutely no place to put it. I tied it to my pack with a strap and trudged on. We labored 4 miles up and over Blood Mountain at 4,461 feet, the highest and toughest eminence on the trail in Georgia. Then began a steep and exciting 2-mile descent toward Neal's Gap. Exciting because there was a shop at Neal's Gap, at a place called Wallasey Ye Inn, where you could buy sandwiches and ice cream. At about 1:30, we heard a novel sound, motor traffic, and a few minutes later, we emerged from the woods onto U.S. Highway 19 and 129, which, despite having 2 numbers, was really just a back road through a high pass between wooded nowheres. Directly across the road was the Wallasey Ye Inn, a splendid stone building constructed by the Civilian Conservation Corps, a kind of army of the unemployed during the Great Depression, and now a combination hiking outfitters, grocery, bookshop, and youth hostel. We hastened across the road, positively scurried across, and went inside. Now, it may seem to stretch credibility to suggest that things like a paved highway, the whoosh of passing cars, and a proper building could seem exciting and unfamiliar after a scant 5 days in the woods. But in fact, it was just so. Just passing through a door, being inside, surrounded by walls and a ceiling, was novel. And the Wallasey Ye's stuff, well, I can't begin to describe how wonderful it was. There was a single modest-sized refrigerator filled with fresh sandwiches, soft drinks, cartons of juice, and perishables like cheese. And Katz and I stared into it for ages, dumbly captivated. I was beginning to appreciate that the central feature of life on the Appalachian Trail is deprivation. That the whole point of the experience is to remove yourself so thoroughly from the conveniences of everyday life that the most ordinary things, processed cheese, a can of pop gorgeously beaded with condensation, fill you with wonder and gratitude. It is an intoxicating experience to taste Coca-Cola as if for the first time and to be conveyed to the very brink of heaven by white bread. Makes all the discomfort worthwhile, if you ask me. Katz and I bought 2 egg salad sandwiches each, some potato chips, chocolate bars, and soft drinks, and went to a picnic table in back where we ate with greedy smackings and expressions of rapture, then returned to the refrigerator to stare and wonder some more. The Walisi Yi, we discovered, provided other services to bona fide hikers for a small fee: laundry, showers, towel rental, and we greedily availed ourselves of all those. The shower was a dribly, antiquated affair, but the water was hot, and I have never, and I mean never, enjoyed a grooming experience more. I watched with the profoundest satisfaction as 5 days of grime ran down my legs and out the drain hole, and noticed with astonished gratitude that my body had taken on a noticeably svelter profile. We did 2 loads of laundry, washed out our cups and food bowls and pots and pans, bought and sent postcards, phoned home, and stocked up liberally on fresh and packaged foods in the shop. The Walisi Yi was run by an Englishman named Justin and his American wife, Peggy. And we fell into a running conversation with them as we drifted in and out through the afternoon. Peggy told me that already they had had 1,000 hikers through since January 1st. With the real start of hiking season still to come, they were a kindly couple, and I got the sense that Peggy in particular spends a lot of her time talking people into not quitting. Only the day before, a young man from Surrey had asked them to call him a cab to take him to Atlanta. Peggy had almost persuaded him to persevere, to try for just another week, but in the end he had broken down and wept quietly and asked from the heart to be let to go home. My own feeling was that for the first time, I really wanted to keep going. The sun was shining, I was clean and refreshed. There was ample food in our packs this time. I had spoken to my wife by phone and knew that all was well. Above all, I was starting to feel fit. I was sure I'd lost nearly 10 pounds already. I was ready to go. Katz, too, was aglow with cleanness and looking chipper. We packed our purchases on the porch and realized, together in the same instant, with joy and amazement, that Mary Ellen was no longer part of our routine. I put my head in the door and asked if they had seen her. "Oh, I think she left about an hour ago," Peggy said. Things were getting better and better. It was after 4 o'clock by the time we set off again. Justin had said there was a natural meadow ideal for camping about an hour's walk further on. The trail was warmly inviting in late afternoon sunlight. There were long shadows from the trees and expansive views across a river valley to stout, charcoal-colored mountains. And the meadow was indeed a perfect place to camp. We pitched our tents and had the sandwiches, chips, and soft drinks we had bought for dinner. Then, with as much pride as if I had baked them myself, I brought out a little surprise: 2 packets of Hostess cupcakes. Katz's face lit up like the birthday boy in a Norman Rockwell painting. "Oh, wow! They didn't have any Little Debbies, I apologized. Hey, he said. Hey. He was lost for greater eloquence. Cats loved cakes. We ate 3 of the cupcakes between us and left the last one on the log while we could admire it for later. We were lying there, propped against logs, burping, smoking, feeling rested and content, talking for once. In short, acting much as I had envisioned it with my more optimistic moments back home, when Cats let out a low groan. I followed his gaze to find Mary Ellen striding briskly down the trail towards us from the wrong direction. I wondered where you guys had got to, she scolded. You know, you are like really slow. We could have done another 4 miles by now, easy. I can see I'm going to have to keep my eyes on you from now. Say, is that a Hostess cupcake? Before I could speak, or Cats could seize a law with which to smite her dead, she said, well, I don't mind if I do, and ate it in 2 bites. It would be some days before Cats smiled again. The end of chapter 4, and I will make another recording, and hope everybody is doing well. Bye-bye.